and welcome to yet another edition of your weekly international current affairs program, Globe Watch from the Cameroon Radio Television, with me, Charles Bunde, Ed from the Hilton Hotel here in Yaoundé. At least 4.4 billion people use the airwaves to travel today in the world. That is more than 50% of the world's roughly 8 billion people, according to the latest count by the United Nations. The key international organization handling international civil aviation is based in Montreal, Canada, and it is 80 years old, called the International Civil Aviation Organization. What has been its mission in ensuring safety and security over the years? My guest today on Globe Watch is the Secretary General of the International Civil Aviation Organization. Juan Carlos Salazar Gomez, thank you very much indeed for being my guest.
Thank you very much for this invitation.
You traveled all the way from Canada, Montreal, where the headquarters of the International Civil Aviation Organization is found, to be in Cameroon in this month of March, a month for women. Why?
Because we are celebrating a year of facilitation. Facilitation is a discipline that thinks about passengers, cargo shippers, and how to make the journey safe, but at the same time more comfortable. And so we are having an event, a very important event, where we are discussing different aspects on how to make this journey safer and more enjoyable for passengers.
And the event you are talking about is the regional facilitation organized by the International Civil Aviation Organization for Africa here in Cameroon. How crucial is this event in the lifespan of the organization?
As I mentioned, during the last year we are having a lot of focus on facilitation, because as we look into the future of the work of the International Civil Aviation Organization, we want to highlight the importance of passengers, cargo shippers, those persons that utilize the services of air transportation. And this is the best way to make the journeys safe, but at the same time easy and enjoyable. So this event culminates a year of work and expectation. We will have later on April a global event where we will receive the recommendations that we have collected around the world, different events that we have had around the world. This global event is going to take place in Qatar, as I mentioned, next month. And finally, we are going to present some important recommendations and decisions for our 193 member states at the Assembly this October. So it's a very important step that will take us, the progress that we are achieving, and Cameroon is a good example of the implementation of many of these measures.
You are a specialized agency of the United Nations, existing 80 years old now. In a moment to understand what the word facilitation means in aviation. But first, what are the major conclusions you arrived at the Yaoundé gathering, which you'll be using for your future summit, especially the one to take place in Qatar, as you said, and the council meeting in October?
Well, we have discussed matters related to passenger identification, like the electronic passports and the sharing of information among immigration authorities, to which Cameroon is a great leader and a great example, not only in the region but globally. We have discussed matters related to other means of identification different to documents. We have discussed matters about accessibility and the situation for those passengers that have difficulties in mobilization, and so how we can make the services of air transportation more accessible and more enjoyable for these passengers. We have discussed matters related to accident investigation, and especially attendance of the families of the victims of an accident, where things does not go well, which is very rarely in aviation, but it's a big disaster, and so we need states to be prepared in order to respond on that. And I took the opportunity even today to open up a new search and rescue facility that Cameroon is putting into service for the benefit not only of Cameroon but of the region in case of search and rescue efforts.
You used the word in our first moments of the conversation, facilitation, and you just used it again, facility. What does it actually mean in the aviation industry?
It means everything that goes along with the passenger journey. So picture yourself as a passenger. When you arrive at the airport, you know, all the accessibility that you have to enter the airport, then all the processing that you have from the check-in counters to passing through security and then immigration authorities. Later on, when you are in your near the gate waiting to board your flight, how is the process of boarding your flight and you know, loading of the aircraft. And then when you picture yourself arriving at the end, at your destination also, what is the journey that you have as a passenger in that regard? So when you arrive, what sort of facilities and processes are applicable to you?
The echo chamber.
All the entire echo chamber. So we are thinking here on how to make better the journey for the passengers, but at the same time there are many authorities besides civil aviation authorities or airlines or airports, many authorities that are involved. There are immigration authorities, there is police or security authorities, there is customs authorities. So facilitation, we call this discipline where there are a certain number of standards that are applicable globally, where different authorities and different actors come together in order to provide a better service.
You mentioned of safety as one of the key features of your work. Just this year alone, we have had roughly 99 aviation incidents, and about 63 of them were fatal plane crashes, basically in the United States in the month of January. Are you worried about the air transport today?
Safety and security, saving life of people or preserving the life of those that utilize air transportation is the core preoccupation, not only of the International Civil Aviation Organization, but also from governments, from civil aviation authorities, from airlines, from airports. Everyone, each person, each professional that works in this system is concerned about safety and security. So during the last 80 years, this organization, as I mentioned, is 80 years young, I would say. During the last 80 years, the organization has adopted standards and recommended practices and guidance material and developed capacities around the world that has made air transportation the safest mode of transportation. Of course, each opportunity that an incident or an accident happens is a major disaster, is a failure of the system certainly, but the system is built in a manner that even in those very sad occasions when the disaster happens, the system is geared especially to understand what went wrong and how can we prevent future accidents or incidents to happen.
Around the world today, roughly 4.4 billion people travel using the plane or by flying or by air transport out of the 8 billion people we have in the world, which means that plus 50% of the world's population today travel by air. What has been the key mission of the International Civil Aviation Organization operating from Canada in making their traveling enjoyable over the years?
Well, The organization has been mandated from its very creation to set standards that are applicable across the world. Standards that goes from how to design and certify an aircraft to how to train and issue a license to a pilot or to a cabin crew, passing from aspects related to airport design and operations, etc. There are over 12,500 standards that have been created by the major experts around the world that convey in different panels of experts at the International Civil Aviation Organization. So once these standards are established, then our work is on the one side to conduct audits. We have audit programs where we visit each of our 193 member states to make sure that these standards are being implemented in their national legislation. And on the other side, we work with our member states also to enhance the capacity. Whenever we identify gaps on the implementation of certain standards, we work with our member states through our regional offices and with partner organizations so that we enhance the system. So this is a system that is in continuous improvement, in continuous growth.
Today, it is estimated that the global travel industry, which of course is aviation industry in particular, generates roughly $10 trillion into the economy. When you look at the opportunities offered in terms of job, in terms of other facilities around the world by the aviation industry, how is the International Civil Aviation Organization networking with member states to make it in an expansion form?
The economic contribution, the social and economic development brought by the civil aviation sector is very telling. There are many telling stories about this. I think Cameroon is a very good example of that. And what we have been discussing with our member states lately is how air transportation is again in the path of growth. In fact, we expect from now until the year 2050, the number of passengers will nearly triple. And this growth will take place particularly in countries like Cameroon, markets that are yet to develop to the fullest potential. So the organization is working with other development partners and is working with our member states to make its presence more relevant and closer to the needs and expectations of countries and regions that have so much potential, such as Cameroon does. And I have been a witness during my visit to Cameroon about the very good initiatives. In particular, we continue to promote air transport liberalization, and Cameroon is a member and promotes air transport liberalization in the African region, what is called as the single African aviation market. So that initiative is something that is very positive. And on the other side, Cameroon is investing in developing talent, young talent to aviation. I visited the training center today, and I have seen the capabilities that Cameroon has to offer to young people in this country and in the region.
The world is quite changing with a lot of technological innovations coming into the aviation industry, and I'm sure that you at the International Civil Aviation Organization, you should critically be looking at how to inject artificial intelligence, digitalization in helping the processes for passport processing, identification of individuals with all the challenges that go with that. When you look critically at the world today, what will you single out as one of the greatest achievements that the organization which you are heading has had over the past 80 years?
Well, as I mentioned, our core work has been focusing on improving the safety and security standards.
Okay.
But I would say that the focus, especially after the pandemic, it taught us that there are many aspects that can greatly influence,
We are
affect
talking about the end of COVID or
the
the subsiding.
the COVID-19 pandemic and how it affected the mobility, international air mobility, and the development of air
Yeah,
transportation.
because nearly everything was grounded.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
So we have learned that we are bound to look beyond that and look at systems that will make the air transport, global air transport ecosystem more resilient and prepare for events like this. And in that regard, we have been creating platforms like the Public Key Directorate platform and other platforms where states can collaborate and share information, and that those platforms even can be good basis for the automation process, which I believe is an important
How many
trend.
training centers do you run around the world today to ensure that the standards of pilots are up to date, that the standards of airport attendants are up to date, that the passenger crew and all that goes with it are up to standards to minimize risk?
Well, the organization does not run directly training centers.
Yeah.
This is more for
It should
member
be
states.
facilitating for member states
But
to have
we
theirs.
establish the standards, the minimum requirements,
Okay.
and then we have a network of institutions that we call the Trainer Plus institutions.
Okay.
So in that regard, we are proudly having nearly to 500 institutions around the world that have already these highest standards that the organization expect from the training institutions for aviation.
What is the greatest challenge facing the industry today?
There are many.
Yeah.
One of the most important challenge, I will say, is to attract young talents to the aviation sector. That is important because, again, as one of the after effects of the COVID-19 pandemic was that the sector lost many of the experts and people that have experience and knowledge. And now retraining this group of people, attracting young talent, is a priority for the sector. And in that regard, we believe that member states and industry will need to invest more in developing that baseline of talent that are required.
You are in Africa, certainly, and you know some of the difficulties that may be involved with air transport in Africa. When you look at the African aviation, civil aviation space, what assessment do you make of it?
I see potential everywhere in Africa. I see great potential in a continent that has a very important population base, a population that loves to travel, and then air travel is, I imagine air travel as flying bridges and tunnels that the geography and the distances sometimes does not allow to have. So aviation is truly an integration tool for Africa. I believe that the authorities, governments in Africa have identified that with this initiative to pursue a single African air transport agreement, and especially liberalizing the opportunities to create new airlines.
The African Continental Free Trade Area environment.
Exactly, and creating new airlines and opening up new routes. So facilitating that market access to airlines, especially in the African continent, is essential to improve the benefits that aviation can bring to the country.
One of the key partners you network, of course, should be airline companies around the world. You can talk of American Airlines, you can talk of Ethiopia Airlines, you can talk of Cameco, you can talk of Air Nigeria, Air Peace, and the list can go on. How does the cooperation framework of your structure look like in networking with the key actors of the aviation industry, including IATA, which is another branch which looks at coding and whatsoever?
Yes, the industry has a very important role to play in the development of the aviation services and the aviation sector. But I have to say that besides the airlines, there are also The airports operators are also very important key partners in developing new routes, in developing security, safety, facilitation for services. There are air navigation service providers. They control over the skies and make the journeys safe and direct and without delays is also an important part of the work in the system. We have the aircraft manufacturers and the aerospace industry at large. They also have an important role to play. And now the civil aviation sector is focusing also in addressing the carbon emissions and other secondary effects that aviation creates. We have a commitment.
You're talking about environmental challenges in ensuring a sustainable management of the environment, especially with air pollution, which of course is quite huge with the airport system.
Exactly. All actors in the civil aviation system, including the airlines, airports, air navigation service providers, and governments, came together and committed that by the year 2050 we are going to have an air transport system that is net zero emissions.
That's quite difficult to achieve. In a moment the interview comes to an end. You are meeting in Yaoundé under the theme Seamless Skies. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, what we pursue is a journey for passengers that is pleasant and without any obstacles in the journey. So we were talking about facilitation, but we were also talking about air traffic management that delivers on-time performance for all the actors in the sector, airlines, airports, air navigation service providers, all having the passenger in mind.
One of the key elements, or if you like, threats to the aviation industry today is, of course, insecurity. And that insecurity goes with making sure that terrorists don't board planes, making sure that drug traffickers don't enter the plane with cocaine and other unacceptable elements in the skies. What are you doing in assisting your member states in putting in rollbacks that ensure that things like, unfortunately, 9/11 don't happen again and all around the world?
Well, on the one side, the area of work of the organization focus in a discipline that we call aviation security. And aviation security basically is seeking to avoid acts of or prevent acts of unlawful interference. So these type of events and the measures that are adopted by recommendations from the organization that later on are adopted by governments seek to avoid this kind of hijacking and seizure of airplane. But for other threats that the aviation sector face, we basically set up the collaboration among the different authorities at the national level. So part of our recommendations is that authorities should implement national aviation security committees. The National Aviation Security Committees will allow all the authorities, police, Air Force, and other forces in a country to come together and address specific threats that the country may face. You are saying illegal trafficking of people or illegal trafficking of substances. And on the other side, we also promoting to countries the creation of national aviation facilitation committees to also allow for this coordination, especially when it comes to immigration authority, the provision of advanced passenger information, which is one of the programs that work very well for immigration and police authorities, electronic passports and the database where information is shared among all the member states in order to control precisely that criminals utilize air transport services.
One but last question. I hope my statistics and research is quite correct. Before moving on, the Secretary General of the International Civil Aviation Organization, you were the civil aviation boss of Colombia, of your country. Tell me the Colombian civil aviation experience.
Well, it was a very fulfilling experience that helped me to understand better the many challenges that civil aviation bosses of our 193 member states face. Indeed, when you have an aviation system that is growing as fast, for example, as Cameroon grows, then there are many aspects of these moving pieces of this system that needs to, you need to pay attention so that the system is not constrained or is not creating risks or threats that later on may have sad results. So in that regard, it was an excellent opportunity for me, not only to contribute to my own country, but also to understand better colleagues around the world in systems that are fast growing like Cameroon.
Finally, my longest travel by air, non-stop, was from Addis to Seoul, and that should be roughly 13 hours. You were talking about enjoying a travel experience. What has been your longest flight distance?
15 hours.
And how was the experience?
It was tiring, demanding, but
15 hours from where to where?
I recall a journey from Canada to Seoul as well. So it was also a very long flight, and so it was an opportunity to catch up with work, to exercise a little bit during the flight. You need to move around because otherwise you can face more difficulties when you arrive. And then also to catch up with some movies and have some enjoyment. So overall, I believe that if you keep yourself distracted at different points, I also slept, of course, but if you keep distracted and try to accommodate your life to the destination that you are going to arrive, you can enjoy travel.
And with that, we conclude the interview. The Secretary General of the International Civil Aviation Organization with headquarters in Montreal, Canada, Juan Carlos Salazar Gomez of Colombian nationality. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much indeed for being my guest.
Muchas gracias.